Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a Bock. It is a beer from a brewer I've never tried anything from before, so not a Pilsner for the first take, but still a lager. So we're going to be jumping into this brewer called Wayfinder Beer. They're based in Portland, Oregon. The name of this beer is Funeral Bock, and this one clocks in at 7% ABV. So starting with the label art, I'm not sure if this is entire design. I think the top part of the design and then their logo is kind of in the bottom in that gold kind of triangle on the bottom. I don't know how well the camera's going to pick that up, how much glare there may be, but it's cool looking label art. Got a black cat, looks like shooting laser beams out of it with some, I don't know what that is, dripping off of the cat. Don't want to speculate, but cool looking label art. I like the design. So let's get this one cracked gently. All right, we're gonna get this poured right in the old glass. Oh, that is looking a classic dark brown Bock. Not quite as dark as a porter. Looking very, very malty. All right. We're not quite gonna get that whole thing in there. I want to give room for that head to settle. So yeah, visually, yeah, classic Bock. Very, very dark with slight amber undertones if you're holding up to a light. Otherwise, it just looks dark, dark brown. If you're in a very low light room, it may even look black, but it's not. It's just very dark brown, but not quite as dark as a porter. So visually, it looks exactly right. Bocks are a beer style that can kind of form heads all over the board. They do typically form a decent head. This one did a pretty good job here. It's looking nice and creamy, nice and foamy. Bocks are one of those beer styles that tend to be pretty effervescent, so we'll see how long this head actually stays up, but for right now it looks quite nice. Let's get over it for a good sniff. Oh yeah. Yeah, it smells really nice. That smells very much like a classic Bock. There are a lot of aroma elements in a Bock that remind me of a Pilsner, but it's less kind of hop dominant and more malt bill dominant, so it smells very malty. It smells very grainy, very cereal-like. So those kind of baked good elements that you do get in a Pilsner, those are common in a Bock. Those are the normal, that's the grains that you're smelling, producing those aromas. And it smells absolutely fantastic. So this beer looks right, it smells right, it formed a nice head. Nothing left to do but jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh yeah. Wow. Oh, that's a really, really nice, well done Bock. Okay, this immediately puts me in mind of many of my favorite classic German Bocks. Aventinus by Polliner, Salvator by also Polliner, I believe. Just really, really amazing. This tastes like a classic Bock. So what does that mean? What does a Bock classically taste like? Well, we talk about the aromas, and that's really what gets translated in the glass in a Bock. So it's got some elements that are in common with a Pilsner, but it's distinctly its different style. You'll notice that it's darker, so yeah, it's a lot more richly roasted. So it does taste malty in the sense that it's got a very grain-like quality to it, but it's also almost like a hybrid of, say, a porter or a brown ale mixed with something lighter and really kind of baked good centric. It's kind of a hybrid between that. They do tend to be higher in ABV. This is 7%. I mean, that's really IPA territory, but it's a Bock. And what it does is creates tons of different flavor layering. So you do have this natural underlying grain sense to it. You have this natural baked good sense to it, but because it involves so many richly roasted malts, including caramel and darker malts, it adds in a lot of different character to it in terms of layers of flavor. So there's a ton of caramel and toffee notes coming off of this, as well as having these really nice roasty edges that start kind of putting you in mind of a cup of coffee. And this is not like Italian or French roast. This would be more like some kind of standard house blend or a medium roast blend. So it's got elements of that. And this is coming typically from unmalted barley. It's the same thing that gives stouts and some porters these roasty notes. They'll take varying degrees of roasted but unmalted. That means it didn't sprout It didn't start the germination progress, just the raw barley itself that they've malted or that they have not malted, but they have roasted. So that's where these tones come from. Once the barley has malted, then it becomes a totally different animal. There's a ton of different flavor elements and compounds that happen after the malting process. But if they just roast without the malting, that's where you start getting these various intensities of really intricate, kind of delicate roast notes, as well as a lot of these underlying coffee vibes. And that's what I'm getting in this. It's rich, it's nice, it's not super sweet, but it's got a little sweetness to it. That's very common for a Bock. No lactose in these. That's coming purely from the malts in the beer. That's coming straight from the barley. And this one is very, very well done. It really does remind me of some of my favorite German brewers Bock offerings, and that is a high, high compliment. So I'm going to jump back in for a second sip. We're going to think about the body and the mouthfeel this time. Let those flavors intensify, pick apart this finish. Overall, very, very impressive beer. Very nice Bock. Body on this one is a big full medium, bordering on medium heavy. It's not quite there. It's like the top echelon of medium, which for 7% feels about right to me. Mouthfeel, it's not thick and viscous like a big high ABV stout, but it's got some resistance to it, and when you agitate around the palate, it does get quite creamy. Both of these are very common traits of a Bock that would be in this ABV range. It feels exactly right to me. It's got the right amount of heft and the exact right mouthfeel. On second sip intensification, you get that roastiness up front, and it dies down the major intensity about 5 seconds and then slowly tips off to about 10. And that's once you hit kind of that 10-ish second mark, that's really when the kind of underlying sweet notes of the malt bill start to pop in. So it starts with roasty, it starts with rich, and then it kind of intensifies, ramps down a little bit. Then those underlying sweet notes come through. They last about a 5-10 second in tandem with the roasty that are still going, and it finishes off really with just lingering roast on the back end. Now, Bocks, if they're not barrel aged, they're not going to have the longest finish compared to other beer styles. They're not heavily hopped traditionally, and they're not going to be super bitter forward and pungent bitter traditionally, and this is following that very traditional approach. That said, there is a significant amount of length on the very tail end of the finish on this one where there is still residual roasty malt notes that are kind of floating on the back of the palate. So this one is definitely well above average in terms of length, even though this is not a barrel-aged Bock. Overall, what I think they've done here is craft their own version of a classic German Bock, and they have absolutely nailed it. Visually, aroma-wise, taste-wise, body, mouthfeel, the balance of it, it's all right, and I absolutely love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. Again, this was Wayfinder Beer's Funeral Bock, a Bock that clocks in at 7% ABV. Wayfinder Beer is based in Portland, Oregon. So starting with the aroma on this beer was very nice. It smelled very much like a classic Bock, so you could get this underlying maltiness. There was a good bit of the underlying roastiness and caramel notes that came through, and it did have an above average pungency. Overall, the aroma gets a 7 out of 10. For the taste to me on this is really what sealed the deal. This tasted so much like some of my absolute favorite German Bocks, and that is a high, high compliment because these are world-renowned, my favorites, and it was immediate that my mind went straight into that very same place. They nailed the classic essence that is a Bock, and you know, it's their own American interpretation of a classical German style, and it was just well executed. The malt bill that they chose, the ratio of those, the amount of hops and what they put in was exactly right. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, Bocks are a bigger, heavier beer style. This is 7%, so yeah, it did have some heft to it. Bocks do have some heft to them. It's not as heavy as, say, an Imperial Stout, But for 7%, right in the range of higher normal, before we get into Doppelbocks, this felt exactly right to me. Body does get a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this was yet again quintessential Bock. They do have more substance to them, and that does translate into the mouthfeel as well. So there is a bit of resistance to it. It doesn't feel thick like a milkshake IPA, but it doesn't feel flat either. In general, a Bock has a little bit more resistance than, say, your average IPA. So it's just got a little more heft to it. Same thing in the body and same thing in the mouthfeel, and this did exactly right. Mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this was longer than average. Certainly there are barrel-aged Bocks. This was just a standard Bock, but it had a really nice intensity of that malt bill that did push it out longer than average. Finish does get a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did just an absolutely beautiful job. Bocks can kind of be all over the place. They do tend to be pretty active in terms of carbonation, but this one formed a really nice head and it kept around the entire time. Head and retention gets a 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook Bock, that very dark ambery. It's brown, but not quite as dark as a porter, kind of somewhere between a porter and a brown ale. That's where they set. That's exactly what this delivered. Appearance does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance, I talked about this when talking about the flavor, and yeah, the balance on this was exactly right. Whatever their underlying bittering hops were, they used lower alpha acid content hops, so there wasn't a really big bitter bite, and it really let the underlying malt bill and malt selection that they chose come through and speak. It was absolutely delicious and deliciously balanced. The balance does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. This is an extremely well done Bock. Not a style I get to drink as often as I'd like. Frankly, it's not as popular as some other beer styles, but when I do come across them, I love to grab them. This one was excellent. It gets a 10 out of 10 subjectively from me. Finally, is an example of the style. This beer only lost a few points in a few categories, nothing really that critical. And frankly, this is a really, really well done Bock. Any Bock that I try in my brain immediately goes to my favorite well-reputed German Bocks. That's a feather in the cap to the brewer, and they did a great job with this. This is a great example of what a Bock is and should be. Example of the style gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Wayfinder Beer's Funeral Bock to a 94 out of 100. This is well above average, guys. If you're a fan of maltier beers or Bocks in general, this is definitely one to see. You could even put this up against any other Germans if you have your favorites. Grab this in the lineup. You could blindfold test just to see. This is just a well done Bock. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just turn on the notifications, hit that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.